Good morning, everybody. You know what? Christmas and New Year just gets in the way of listening to me and Michael, doesn't it, really? You could do without it, let's be honest. I trust everyone's had a fine break. Michael, how are you before we crack on, before I do the intro? Just making sure.
Yeah, very good morning, Shirai. Good morning, everyone. Happy New Year and all the rest of it. I'm not too bad at all, mate. Very happy to be back, rested after a couple of weeks off. And, well, the new year has certainly started with a few fireworks already.
Well, quite literally. Well, on that note, let's do the proper introduction. Welcome, everybody. It is the first morning blast of the year 2026 for those keeping count. You join myself and the awesome Mr. Michael Brown, or Mr. Michael Beige, as I'm going to start calling him, because he can be a little bit boring. See what I'm doing there?
Dear. That is terrible.
It really is, but it's all I've got at the moment, to be honest. As usual caveats apply. This is recorded live. And so if you are listening to this on the playback, there are no edits. You take us as you find us, which normally means plenty of trigger words and trigger warnings should be applied to the whole podcast. There's lots of expletives, etc. The gist is we try and give a roundup of what's been occurring in markets, what we think is going to be coming up in markets during the day. If it's a Monday, the week ahead, hopefully put some value into your day. But more importantly, put a smile on your face on a morning to get you going. Again, nothing discussed on the podcast is trading or investment advice or any of that bollocks. But I would say it's me, you, Zach, and our dear friend Clive Lambert. But I think he's still in Australia, so no idea what's going on there. So no market updates. I should have maybe texted him yesterday, but I completely forgot. So I'll be reaching out to Clive momentarily.
No, I think he did say to us he was going to be back on the 12th. So that Slacker is taking another week off.
You've got a better memory than me.
It's not saying a lot, mate.
No, I was going to say that's not saying much at all. But it's been a very, it's been an exciting 48 hours. There's much to talk about. Do you want to kick us off?
Well, I was going to say we might as well start with the geopolitical developments in Venezuela, and then we can move on to other bits and bobs. Yeah. You'd have to have been living under a rock for the last 2 days to not know what's going on. But just for the avoidance of any doubt, of course, the US conducting a large-scale operation in Venezuela on Saturday morning UK time, Saturday morning local time as well, actually, with the aim of that operation being to arrest and extract President Maduro and his wife. Both of those have been indicted on various drug and drug terrorism related charges.
You know what? I wonder if when he was getting picked up by Delta Force, if he was like, do me a favour, I could do with a couple of weeks without her, leave her behind, please.
Well, he did say, do me a favour, let me change into my grey Nike tracksuit.
I'll tell you what, that's the big winner here. The big winner is definitely Nike shares.
Long NKE at the open, not investment advice. In any case, of course, Maduro is now in the NIT in New York somewhere, and he is likely to be appearing in court at some stage during the day today. In the meantime, President Trump at a press conference on Saturday giving an update on effectively what's happened, the operation that took place. He was also talking about the future, saying that the US will run Venezuela for some time, in his words, until there can be a safe and judicious transfer of power. For the time being, it appears that Maduro's vice president, Rodriguez, is in charge, and indications are, a little bit peculiar, actually. On Saturday, she was saying this is all wrong. Yesterday, she was saying, actually, maybe I will cooperate with the United States.
So just on this, obviously, I'm going to pat myself on the back here. I've put out 2 articles over the past.
Now, very good, actually.
Less of a shocked tone of voice, Bill. One on Venezuelan oil, because before we go into any deep, anyone just spouting about oil, thinking that oil one suit fits all, and there are many different flavors of oil. And Venezuelan oil is pretty shitty. They've actually got to import better oil to water theirs down with so they can export it. But again, do read the article that I put out. And also, more importantly, potentially now at least, do read the article on Delcy Rodriguez. But like you said, it started off, she was saying one thing to the public, and then, she's come round and said, actually, we're willing to talk. There were rumours straight away that this went all a bit too effortlessly for the US, and potentially, there might have been some inside informants, whatever, and immediately people were pointing fingers at Delcy. I wouldn't be, obviously we have no idea what, the details yet, but I wouldn't be surprised if she has something to do with it. One thing to note, and again, I put out tons of posts on her the last 24 hours. One thing to note is she really does hold all the cards when it comes to mineral rights and oil and the economy. She's been the she's ran the oil ministry, which is basically PDSVA, and the economic ministry for the last couple of years. So if you did want to keep one person in power, it would be her. So yeah, we'll see how it plays out. Again, I think Michael, it's probably sensible that we kind of caveat everything we've said which is depending on how many hours after we've spoken, you listen to this, it could be all out of date.
Yeah, absolutely. If you are listening to this on the recording, then basically look at what the latest news is, because this is how the land lies at 8:30 London time on Monday morning.
For you,
go on.
Are you as annoyed by the tourists and the talking heads telling us that basically 3 million barrels of oil is going to come online in the next 2 weeks? They're going to just turn the tap. Oil open small down, and they're saying, yeah, this is because of the flood of oil coming from Venezuela.
It's infuriating.
But do you know what pissed me off even more?
Go on.
So Nat Gas opened up, I think it was down something like 6% or something. I haven't looked at it recently, but it was down like a good old chunk. And you had like the mugs at the Kobayashi letter and all that. Honestly, if you follow them, if you repost them, I do really kind of my opinion of you drops significantly if I see you engaging with the Kobayashi letter on anything positively. But the reason that Nat Gas fell off a fucking wall this morning overnight on the Globex Open was because on Sunday we get quite significant weather forecast, basically temp forecasting, comes out on a Sunday, and that's really important to gas oil markets, like nat gas markets. And on Wednesday we were looking for quite cold weather. Sunday's update was much more milder, which means less need for nat gas in the winter because you don't need to heat as much, and that's why we fell off the cliffs. Anyone that knows nat gas markets knows that's the reason. Anyone you see pointing at the moving crude and the moving nat gas and saying this is all Venezuela, basically their mask is slipped and they don't know what they're talking about, to put it bluntly.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think just to, obviously we joke, but Ryan did used to trade a bit of crude back in the day. So this is
apparently I don't remember it.
One of the very few things he does actually know what he's talking about. But
very few. Very, very, very few.
This is where things get a little bit interesting, because of course Trump was saying over the weekend on numerous occasions that US firms are going to spend what he was saying billions of dollars to rebuild energy infrastructure in Venezuela. And it will take billions of dollars, if not tens of billions of dollars, because effectively from us,
it definitely is tens of billions. It's tens of billions. And really, to get it back to to keep production where it is, you still need to invest billions. If you want to see a meaning uptick in production from Venezuela, you need tens and tens of billions, because, everything from, I saw one real good breakdown, which was basically, you've seen people already. I'll tell you what we might want to do, Michael, is because anyone can read the overnight news roundup that we put out. So I don't mind spending a bit more time on Venezuela, because we can just poke people to the news.
Go and read what Zach's written.
Yeah, because this is worth talking about. One thing that people need to understand is that, it's not just tens of billions to just turn on a few taps and stuff. It's like they've really got to redo the well. That basically they've got to re-drill the wells, because
we've got to start from scratch.
Yeah, it's sludge basically. The Orinoco crude is absolutely, at room temperature, it's basically, it doesn't move. It's like, it's like what you lay the fucking drive with, and you tarmac your roads with. But the thing is, so you got tens of billions just to go in and redo the wells, re-drill the wells. You got tens of billions that were put into 4 kind of upgraders, which are huge refineries that basically mix in the Orinoco sludge with, decent, dilutants or better oil.
Naphtha is what they usually use, isn't it?
There we go. Someone's been doing some research over the weekend. Love it. I'm creating a monster. That and the beer, I'm loving it. But the thing is, so you had a lot of these US oil majors put in tens of billions, and they made 4 of these big upgraders, basically. And 3 of them are now basically raped and pillaged and rusting hulks. And one of them is operating at about 25% capacity. So literally, whoever's going to go in and step in needs to invest tens of billions and years to remake all of this. But one thing people are forgetting is this is Latin America. It doesn't matter who your guarantee is. It's a very tumultuous kind of region. And if you've been stung once by investing tens of billions and then being kicked out, you're gonna, it's gonna be a bit of a hard ask to ask your your investors or your board to okay. Yes, I agree. We've got Trump saying, almost Trump, well, the US military might backstop in your investment, but still, it's not as clear cut as it seems, right?
No, absolutely not. And there are a number of moving parts. And I think, as we alluded to earlier on the oil issue in particular, everyone's running around saying Venezuela's got a lot of oil. Yes, it does. But that oil is, well, to put it bluntly, the wrong sort of oil, because it's very hard to refine into something useful, as we just discussed. It's also very hard to get out of the ground, as we just discussed as well. So what all that means is that the cost of production, once you've invested all of this capital expenditure to get all of the infrastructure back up and running, the cost of producing that oil is very, very high, which means that in order for the production to be economical, you need Brent substantially north of $60 a barrel, which is where it's trading at the moment. The other thing to think about, which everyone seems to have skipped over, and maybe you mentioned this at some point over the weekend, is the US is now one of the biggest crude producers in the world, and the US is now a net energy exporter. So whereas in the past, the US would have run around and gone, lower crude prices is great. Well, actually, lower crude prices is effectively akin to shooting your own domestic industry in the foot at this moment in time. So again, that's going to be something that sort of weighs on the minds of these oil majors when they're making the decision whether or not to go back in.
Absolutely. And, the thing is, the Gulf Coast refineries were basically built for heavy crude from Mexico, from Venezuela. But obviously, the reliability of that kind of dropped, it then kind of the feedstock was coming from Canada. So this is why we're seeing people, is this really bearish Canada because they're just going to replace it. It's going to take a long time, even if they decided to do that.
10 years.
But exactly, we're talking decades. But a good piece that I actually retweeted, a guy, again, funny enough, he's a specialist in heavy grade Canadian oil. He basically put, back of the envelope kind of maths to try, what it would take to replace Canadian oil. And he's coming up with basically near on $1 trillion, because what you've got to remember is not only are you drilling, not only are you making all the refineries, the upgraders, or not refineries, but the upgraders in Venezuela and all of this stuff, but then you've actually got to power these things. And now Venezuela has rolling blackouts. So you're going to have to invest in, we talk about AI data centers requiring power. Well, refineries require a bit of power. Upgraders, processing require a fair bit of power. I keep saying refineries, I mean the upgraders to send it over the Gulf. So you're basically rebuilding the whole country's infrastructure to send this oil out. And one thing to note, and again, we'll come on to non-oil related stuff in a minute with Venezuela, because there is a lot of it. But China receives about 80% of Venezuelan crude at the moment. Now, the reason they do this is because Venezuela, I'll give you a clue, aren't paying market prices. Venezuela invested about $60 billion into Venezuela officially. God knows what else they've done unofficially. And in return for that, Venezuela have been giving significant amount of oil for free, because it was a loan for oil. Well, say free, obviously China's already invested the money, and the oil they are selling is incredibly discounted rates. So there's an argument to be made. Again, this pushes back on, and we all love a good pushback story. Get that one on early. There's this whole Trump's just trying to grab the oil that's really not the case. I can concede that he wants a hand on the tap, because now if he's got a hand on the tap that's supplying China, he might not need both hands on it, but if he's got one hand on it at least, then he has incredible leverage over China. So all these things start adding up, and then and it's not, like I say, it's not just about the oil. Venezuela were a hub for Russian activities, both militarily and financially. They were a hub for Iran for the same reason. They were a hub for even Hezbollah and Hamas. There really are, anyone that was against America, they were like the friendly nation that was close by. So there's far more at play here. And we haven't even gone on to the critical minerals that are in Venezuela, in rare earths and stuff. As Trump said, I think Trump said maybe overnight or late last night, I think someone mentioned about rare earths, and he said, well, they're not so rare anymore. One eye looking at them, or one eye
a bit out loud there.
yeah, exactly. One eye looking at Greenland as well. We've all, as our friend Polemic Payne said, we've all played Risk, and he's got Alaska, he's got Latin America. If he gets Denmark, he's secured. But
and I think just to sort of take this to a bit of a broader level, because already this morning, it's 8:45, I've fielded a ridiculous number of questions saying basically, why are markets not bothered by this? And I think, fundamentally, it's because for developed markets, at least in the short term and the medium term, and probably the long term as well, depending on your definition of things, what's happened over the weekend doesn't really change anything.
No.
It doesn't change things in terms of oil output. Does it change perception of geopolitical risk? Potentially, but we know that tensions in sort of Latin America have been bubbling up for some time.
Yeah,
We know
I think they're permanently on the high simmer.
Exactly. We've had Trump talking about Greenland even when he was running for president, let alone over the last year or so since he's been in office. There's also a lot of people saying, can we draw parallels from this to China and Taiwan, or from this to Russia and Ukraine? And well, frankly, I don't think we can. And also, I don't think either of those two particularly care about this supposed idea of international law anyway.
No.
So it doesn't make a blind bit of difference on that front. And also, when you consider, as we just discussed, how long this might all take to pan out in terms of transitioning to a new administration, the investment in energy infrastructure, the potential return of even 1 barrel of oil a day to the global market, let alone a few thousand or a million, we are talking years. If not a decade, for all of this to pan out. So, anyone, sorry, just to finish anyone sort of sat here this morning going, why is the S&P trading 0.3% higher? Why are people not selling stocks on the back of the potential for Trump to now move on Greenland? Ultimately, this is, I think, a classic case of, yes, the developments are serious and they're interesting and they are significant, but there is the noise to signal ratio tilts much more heavily in favor of noise than it does in terms of signal at this point. The caveat to that being, if you hold Venezuelan local bonds, you're going to be rolling in cash this morning when they open.
Yeah, exactly all of that, mate. Exactly all of that. Yeah. Well, again, we do need to chat about other things, so I'm happy to kind of move on. I think we covered quite a bit of this. Just one quick thing. Like I said, do definitely read the 2 primers that I put out on, one on Venezuelan oil industry and one on the current head of Venezuela, by the sound of it. But I'm putting out another one later today about the opposition. One thing I quite liked was Mikado. I'm not sure if I butchered the name, but I think of the chocolates. This is the woman that's won the Nobel Peace Prize. This is the woman that was in opposition to Maduro. One thing that I've not seen anyone mention, she's actually quite right-wing and very much a Thatcherite. So I would love her to get into power. She basically wants to privatize 500 odd companies that were kind of nationalized under the Chavezissimo.
Can she come here?
Well, it's quiet. Or can Trump come first with the people in his helicopters and remove someone out of number 10?
Kira, if you're listening, it's a joke. I mean, you don't have a sense of humor, but please don't take us off to the gulag.
Anyway, look, I think we've covered enough of Venezuela. Again, with no doubt we'll be talking much more about it this week, next week, and the weeks ahead. But what else have we got, my friend?
Yeah, indeed. That's not going to go away anytime soon.
No.
A few other bits and bobs.
A bit like my Rams.
Oh, God. Well, you rub some ointment on yourself. I just wanted to mention a few bits and bobs very briefly in terms of developments over the festive season. Of course, it was a pretty subdued spell over the last couple of weeks for markets, as I'm sure everyone can imagine. We didn't exactly get a Santa rally in the equity space, but the S&P did end 2025 about 16% higher, which was the third straight double-digit annual gain. But we did see last year some notable outperformance in Europe. The DAX having its best gain in 6 years, and the FTSE 100 up 22% in 2025, which is the best year since the financial crisis. Nothing to do with Rachel Reeves, of course.
I'm so glad you said that. You beat me to it.
We also saw the FTSE 100 on Friday clear 10,000 for the first time, which is also nothing to do with Rachel Reeves. And that, before anyone comes at me saying, it's politically motivated, it's not. 80% of the revenue for FTSE 100 companies comes from overseas. So you simply cannot use it as a barometer of how the market is viewing UK PLC.
Oh, they will, though. They will. And they are.
People will, but, they shouldn't. Anyway, a couple of other bits and bobs just before we move on to the week ahead. In terms of data over the festive period, we did get the latest US GDP stats. The economy grew by an annualized 4.3% on a quarter-on-quarter basis in the 3 months to September. That is the best performance in a couple of years, but we are now going to see GDP data skewed significantly in Q4, skewed to the downside, of course, as a result of the government shutdown, and then skewed to the upside in Q1 as we recoup all of that. Still Sticking with the States, we have minutes from the December FOMC meeting out last week. They showed that most participants judged further rate reductions as being appropriate, while some participants saw keeping rates on hold for a period of time as more appropriate. For those who are not as nerdy as I am and obsessed with the vocabulary that the Fed used, the word most is greater than the word some, which implies that further rate cuts are on the horizon. Also, President Trump, before he started trying to conquer Latin America, he noted that an announcement as to the next Fed chair will be coming, and I quote, sometime in January, which is about as clear as mud. In terms of other bits and bobs, on Friday, we have the latest manufacturing PMIs from both the Eurozone and the UK. The Eurozone index falling to a 9-month low, 48.8, while the UK manufacturing PMI rose to a 15-month high of 50.6. Likely a bit of a mechanical bounce in there as we moved past the budget. And that, of course, boosting sentiment a little bit just because basically there was some uncertainty removed from the outlook. Also on Friday, we had the latest delivery stats from Tesla. Deliveries in Q4 came in at 418,000, well short of the 440,000 consensus and down by about 15% year on year. Production stats also came in well below expectations as well. And then over the weekend, well, going back to oil, we can't get away from it this morning. OPEC Plus confirmed their plans to keep oil output steady in the first quarter. That's bang in line with expectations.
Just on that. Yeah, they were very, in their briefing and whatnot on this. They really didn't hardly mention Venezuela at all. And I think, it goes to show you that even OPEC are like, you know what, they can let's just see what happens when the dust settles, and then we can decide where your output is going. If the fact that OPEC barely even mentioned Venezuela kind of sums it up, this whole situation.
Yeah, absolutely. I fully agree with you on that one. And last but not least, here in the UK, Prime Minister Keir Starmer was giving a big interview to the BBC over the weekend. The sort of big takeaway from that is Starmer's ruled out the UK returning to the EU single market. But he did say that the UK should move closer to alignment with the single market on, I'm going to quote him here, on an issue-by-issue basis if it is in the national interest to do so. Quite what that means in practice, I'm not sure, but one to watch over the course of the year ahead. And that's all. But if we're skipping the overnight news roundup, we may as well go the week ahead.
I would like to get some feedback from especially our live listeners. Shout out to all of you that make the effort to actually listen to us live. But I actually quite like this new format, this format that we've done today, where we just find a topic to just kind of chat about, rather than you read out a lot, I read out a lot. I do like the to and fro nature of it, and how
more of a collaborative debate.
Yeah, exactly.
I'd like to see how that works when either one or both of us is abysmally hungover, but we can give it a try.
But at least then we've got things like the overnight news roundup to fall back on.
Yeah, that's very true.
You see what I'm doing here? So that's but I'd like to hear people's feedback on that, because I think we can easily find just something to just fucking chat nonsense about in the morning. When I say nonsense is all important. Just one question before we go. Obviously, before the...
Well, I've still got to do the week ahead before we go.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, go on. Oh, no, basically, this week, I was going to ask a Rachel Reeves question, but no, go on, do the week ahead.
I'll do the week ahead very briefly, and then we can have the Rachel Reeves question.
Cool.
Because, of course, it is the first proper trading week of the year. So from a psychological perspective, of course, do just recall that everyone's P&L is reset to zero, and everyone has this sort of pressure on them to do something as they get back to their desk from the festive period. In addition to that, conditions should be returned to something resembling normality. The thin liquidity and light volumes that dominated the festive period are now firmly in the rear view mirror. In terms of calendar highlights, though, I guess the main event of the week comes on Friday. That is going to be the December US labour market report. Headline non-farm payrolls seen having risen by about 60,000 last month, with unemployment falling to 4.5%, down from a prior 4.6. We do actually have quite a lot of US data out this week, including the ISM manufacturing survey today and the ISM services survey on Wednesday. In addition to that, we're getting the December ADP report and the November job openings data on Wednesday. Of course, we get the weekly jobless claims stats on Thursday, and then on Friday, In addition to that jobs report, we also get the latest housing starts, building permits, and consumer sentiment figures. Other than that, the only real release of note comes on Wednesday. That is the latest Eurozone flash inflation data, which is set to show headline CPI having fallen back to the ECB's 2% target in the month of December. And besides that, there are a few other bits and bobs in terms of other regional PMI surveys on the docket throughout the early part of the week. The earnings calendar is pretty light this week, although Q4 earnings season does get underway on Wall Street next Tuesday with the likes of JP Morgan set to report. It comes around so quickly. I know. But to end that on a positive note, there isn't much in terms of central bank speakers this week. Yeah, exactly. We just have the Fed's Barkin tomorrow, and then the ECB chief economist Philip Lane on Friday. And of course, folk will obviously be monitoring those geopolitical developments very, very closely as well. But go on, what's your Rachel Reeves question?
So Rachel Reeves, so obviously we were kind of before the budget and into the end of the year, we were saying, look, there's no way they're going to boot her out before 2026. Now this is all behind us and we've got the spring budget not so far away almost. Again, it comes around. What's your opinion on what's your forecast for Rachel Reeves? Short term, when I say short term, Q1, Q2. Is she staying? Are we thinking, now that we're all coming back to work, are we going to see a renewed kind of increasing whispers and volume of whispers about her ousting? Or do you think it's just going to, the longer we leave it, it's just going to blow under the carpet again?
I think the conversation has almost changed and probably broadened, actually. And the reason I say that is because, if you go back to sort of the middle of last year when we had obviously Reeves in tears in the Commons and all the rest of it, I still can't actually believe that happened. It was all very much a focus on, will Reeves survive? Will the Chancellor be changed, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I think that conversation is now actually a much bigger one around Starmer's leadership. And effectively, will he survive as Labour leader? Will he stay as Prime Minister for this year? It kind of goes without saying that if Starmer were to go, then Reeves is going as well. I still think that May is quite clearly the sort of danger point for Starmer when we have those local elections, which again, right now, all indications are that they are going to go terribly for the Labour Party. The key question is whether those sort of rebellious MPs in the next 5 months or so can unite around one candidate or, one candidate for leader and their chancellor, whether that be Rayner and Streeting or whoever. God help us. That's the key thing now is, are those rebels able to get a candidate in place such that effectively as soon as you have those local election results, they're ready to strike and get Starmer out.
This is it, right? I think with no one seriously in the Labour hierarchy, and we're talking like the people behind the people, no one's going to be looking at the May elections, these local elections and whatnot, and saying, do you know what, we've got a chance here, we can pull it back. I think they must have written this off by now, that they're going to get their asses handed to them, basically. So why get rid of anyone in power? Why get rid of Keir? Why get rid of anyone when you basically want them to shoulder this blame that's going to come their way, and then after the May elections, then gut them and replace them. So I think we could.
Well, this is very similar to what we were saying pre-budget. You know that the budget is going to go pretty terribly. Arguably, the budget actually went slightly better than we were expecting in terms of the fallout. Well, quite. But you want Reeves to own that. Yeah. If you're sat there as a Labour MP going, do you know what, I fancy my chances as Chancellor, you're probably not in the next breath going to go, oh, and do you know what, I'll deliver this budget that's full of really bad news. It's no, actually, let's let the woman who's currently in place own that, fall on her sword, and then I'll ride to the rescue in my chariot to save things.
It's like, let me take that bullet for you.
Yeah, exactly. You'd have a bit of a screw loose if you volunteered to do that. But I will say now on the 5th of January, I would be incredibly surprised if Reeves and Starmer managed to survive the year.
Yeah, I think they'll survive May, unless I think there's a small. I think Starmer will survive until May, the May elections. I think that they'll be mental to get rid of him before then. You might see Reeves binned before then as almost like his kind of token to the public, saying, look, I've binned her now, can you vote for us? But we'll see.
Almost a sort of last chance of last throw of the dice.
Throw that last bit of baggage off the boat and hopefully it stays afloat. But anyway, Michael, it's an absolute pleasure to chat to you again.
Good to be back.
Listeners, again, let us know how you feel about this new vibe where we just spend half the show just talking about a topic rather than just us reading out headlines, etc. I think it works much better. But whatever you're doing, I speak for Michael here. I know I do when I say we hope you have a fantastic week and a day. And not only that, it's the start of the year. Hope you have a very profitable 2026 and achieve everything you deserve, not that you want. Because if you're not willing to put the effort in, you don't.